All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Menachem Av, Benjamin and Elys Wohl of Netanya Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all of his Shur Joshua this month in honor of Moishe Abramson and Jeremy Lasson, who enable all of those outside of our physical Bais Midrash to participate in our shiurim. To thank Jack Bennett for dedicating all of his Shur Joshua this month in memory of Sergeant Nicholai Rappaport of the Givati Brigade, who died in a Hezbullah ambush in southern Lebanon on February 7th, 1998. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Nathan and Beth Adler, in memory of Nathan's father, Ben Adler, HaChaver Baruch Mordechai ben Morenu Rav Nosson, on the occasion of his first yahrzeit on the 23rd of Av, and to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Dr. Mark and Elsa Lustman, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Dr. Lustman's mother, Anne Lustman, Chana Rochel Bas Avraham Alter, whose yahrzeit is on the 21st of Av. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, all of the Nishama Slav and Aliyah and the family Zayin Chama. But with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, exciting daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is page Dalet 84. And we are picking up on page Gimel Amud Beis 83b, and we're actually picking up Na'ana Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, about 18, 19 lines up from the bottom. So as I remember again, in yesterday's daf, we spent actually the majority of the daf speaking about 4 different objections to the position of Rabbi Eliezer. Right, Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah said that if a man says to his wife, "Hari'at mutaris l'chol adam chutz mi ploni," right, we're divorced, and you're permitted to every man with the exception of Shimon, right? Chacham say that's not a divorce. Rabbi Eliezer says it works. We then lodged four points of opposition, right? 4 different Rabbanim came and opposed the position of Rabbi Eliezer. To which the Gemara then said, you might be right, but ve'in mashivin asari la'achar misa. You can't go ahead and you can't contradict the lion after he's dead. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer could have defended himself. The Gemara, remember again, Rava said in yesterday's daf that the truth is 3 out of the 4, one could refute them. The one that you can't was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So the Gemara says, Nan Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, va'amar krisus davra koris beino lebeino. Remember, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's his refutation of Rabbi Eliezer is pretty straightforward. He says at the end of the day, Torah calls a get a sefer krisos. What's a sefer krisos? Something that creates a division, closes the marriage. Obviously, if he's going ahead and he's stipulating who the wife could marry, who she can't marry, then that's not a proper krisos. Cholamarata she'en ze krisos. I Rabbanon high krisos my abdile. What do the Rabbanon do with this concept of krisos? They go ahead and they use it for the following case. It says, what happens if a husband, Reuben is married to Rachel, Reuben is now divorcing Rachel. Reuben says, this is your get, on the condition that you don't drink wine, or on the condition that you don't go to your father's house forever. Ein ze krisos. This is not krisos. Shloshim yom. If he says he can't do it for 30 days, harei ze krisos. Ultimately, that is krisos. I say, interesting. That's what the Rabbanan do with sefer krisos. You could put a t'nai into a get. But the t'nai can't last for the duration of her life. So, if it's a timed t'nai, then that would work. V'idach. The other Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would say, Mikaris krisos nafka. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah who says, you could learn that from the fact that the Torah calls it a sefer krisos, whereas the Torah could have just called it a sefer kares. The fact that it goes ahead and discusses the prolonged form, or use the prolonged form, enables you to learn out both of these things. Number 1, he cannot stipulate whom she can and cannot remarry. That's number 1. And number 2, any t'nai which lasts the duration of her natural life is going to be a problem in the krisos. Okay, v'idach, the Rabbanan will say kares krisos lodash. They don't make that drasha of kares krisos. Amar Rava. So I'll say some other cases. So we already saw in yesterday's daf that we paskin against Rabbi Eliezer and that we paskin like the Rabbanon. Fine. Amar Rava. Interesting case. Reuben is divorcing Rachel. He says, this is your get on the condition that you do not drink wine for the rest of my life. That's what Reuben is saying. The rest of my life, se'en ze krisos. So ultimately, again, this is not krisos. Kol yimei chaye ploni. If he says, Rachel, you can't drink wine the rest of, Levi's life, then ultimately, again, that works. So Maishna Chaye Ploni, why is it that if he attaches the Tanai to the lifespan of Levi that it works? Because Levi might die. Says the Gemara, you can make the same argument. If he attaches it to his lifespan, he might die also. And fulfill the Tanai. You're right. The Gemara says you're right. First one line above in the bottom. Kol yimei chayechi ein ze krisos. Kol yimei chayei o chayei ploni arei ze krisos. So most of this goes to what we just said before. You're right. If he says to Rachel, this is your get on the condition that you don't drink wine for the rest of your life, that is not a proper get because that lacks the element of krisos. If he says you can't drink wine for the rest of my life or the rest of Levi's life, that is krisos. So we'll say what you begin to see over here is as follows. The definition of krisos, a get, cannot hold something over the wife for the duration of her life. And if it does, then that's not a get. Because a get is something that by definition brings closure to the marital relationship. How is that manifest? He has no control over her in any way. No control over her. So therefore, again, whether he says, this is your get on the condition you can't marry Shimon, that's not krisos. Or even if he says, this is your get on the condition that you, or this is your get on the condition you can't drink wine for the rest of your life. He's maintaining a hold on her for the rest of her life. So ultimately, again, that is a fundamental erosion of the concept of krisos, and therefore will undermine the validity of the get. Incredible. Let's go out there. Rav Nachman. What's the fascinating? Listen to this case. Hayom at ishti ulamachar at ishti mahu. We'll say, watch this case. Reuben is married to Rachel. Reuben says to Rachel, today I'm giving you a get on the condition that today you are not my wife, but tomorrow you will be my wife again. Today you're not my wife, tomorrow... Whatever, he has a trade show in Vegas, right? All right, everyone. Right? So everyone except the rabbinate has a trade show in Vegas. It's incredible to see. So the Maisa again. So the Maisa, what happens? He says, today you're not my wife. Today you're not my wife. Tomorrow you are my wife. So I'll say, I just want to be clear. He's giving her a get, right? So this is a condition. It's a conditional get. A conditional get. So he's giving her the get. Today you are divorced. Tomorrow again you're my wife. Now, what's the HaChaver say in such a situation like this? So Tibai the Rabbi Eliezer, Tibai the Rabbanon. So Rabbi say this is a shaila both according to Eliezer and the Rabbanon in the Mishnah. How so? So Tibai the Rabbi Eliezer, Ad Kano Kama Rabbi Eliezer Hasam Ela Dilma de Kashari Shari the Olam Aval Hacha Lo Oduma Loshna. So Rabbi say maybe here's Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah who says that Allah Lamaisa, a husband could say to his wife, this is your get and you are permitted to every man except for Shimon. But that's because when he permits her to everyone else, she's permitted forever. Over here, he's permitting her, so to speak, for a day, and then ultimately, again, saying they're remarried. Maybe even Rabbi Eliezer would say that's not a good divorce. Furthermore, Tibay the Rabbanon, Ad Kam Rabbanon Hasan Elad Lo Paska Mina Legamre. Furthermore, again, I will say, maybe it could be even according to Rabbanon, because according to the Rabbanon, ultimately, again, the reason why the case in the Mishnah doesn't work, where he permits her to everyone except for Shimon, is because ultimately, again, there's not a full divorce. There's not a full krisos. Aval hacha kevan de paska. Should I say in this case, maybe according to the Rabbanan, the divorce does work. Why? Because when he divorces her today, I will say, what's the status of their union? Fully dissolved. And maybe since it's fully dissolved, the Rabbanan would agree that it is a good divorce. To which the Gemara said, Basar Devaya Hadib Hashta. After they asked the question, they answered, Tap of Pei Dalid, Mistabra, Bein Rabbi Eliezer, Bein Rabbanan, Kivan de Paska. But according to both opinions, Rabosai, once he divorces her, she's divorced. So Rabosai, essentially what happens here is as follows. What the Gemara is suggesting is like this. Once he gives her a get and he says to her, you are divorced to me today, that's it. Once there is a complete divorce, even though he's saying in the same breath, but tomorrow we are remarried again, he can say whatever he wants. He can say tomorrow, you're a watermelon. It doesn't make a difference. Lemaisa, once he goes ahead and he says to her, we are divorced, and it is a full-fledged divorce, and he gives her a get, any follow-up Tanai that goes ahead and says, then we're going to be remarried, is an ineffective statement. That's what it means. Kevan de Pascha, Pascha. Once the marriage has been dissolved, the marriage has been dissolved. So I will say, interestingly enough, it turns out that everyone agrees in this case that halacha l'maaseh, the divorce is a valid divorce, and the Tanai essentially is ineffective. Now, it happens to be the Rambam has a whole discussion of this about Safek Megureshes. We're not going to get into it now. For our purposes, we're just going to go with the Maskana of the Gemara, that once you dissolve the marriage is dissolved. The marriage is dissolved, and any subsequent statement that we're going to be remarried tomorrow is an ineffective statement. Incredible. So interesting, I will say. Reuven gives Rachel a get. This is the exact opposite of the case in the Mishnah. Right? Reuven gives Rachel a get. He says, this is your get on the condition you marry Shimon. Shimon is a good guy, or maybe Shimon is not a good guy, right? He deserves you, right? So again, he says to his wife, I'm divorcing you on the condition that you marry Shimon. So what's the halacha in such a situation like this? Harezu lo tinase. She cannot marry. Now, both say, it sounds, we're not sure exactly who she's not remarrying. But okay, she should not remarry. The mises lo teitze. But if she did marry, she doesn't have to leave her husband. So my kamar, what are we saying over here? So let's listen to this. I'm Rav Nachman. So we're going to go through a couple of iterations of this of the explanation here. So just get ready for a little bit of back and forth. So I'm Rav Nachman. Haki kamar. That's what it means to say. Harezu lo tinase lo. So the halacha is she can't marry Shimon. Why? Shama yomru nishehen nostin b'matana. Lest people say that men are gifting their wives away to others. They both say it doesn't look right. Right? It doesn't look right when Reuven goes in and divorces his wife and says, "This is your get on the condition that you marry Shimon." What's going on there? He's giving his wife over to Shimon. That doesn't look right. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, she's not allowed to marry Shimon because it doesn't look right. V'im nises la'achar, but if she ended up marrying someone else, she ends up marrying Levi. Lo teisei, she doesn't have to leave Levi. Gemara says, "Whoa." We'll say, I don't understand. How could she leave Levi? How could she marry Levi? There's a Tanai in this get. There's a Tanai. We'll say again, whether you like the Tanai, you don't like the Tanai, he made a Tanai. So now he said, this is your get on the condition you marry Shimon. She goes in and marries Levi. We're going to let her marry Levi because of a rabbinic prohibition. To which the Gemara says, because remember, again, we'll say, Mida Oraisa, this is a valid get. The Rabbanon say, don't marry Shimon because it looks like Reuven is gifting his wife to Shimon. Fine, I understand that, but how does that give her a license to marry Levi? Right? At the end of the day, non-compliance with Tanai means that she's still married to Reuven. To which the Gemara says, Elam Rav Nachman, Hachi Kamer. This is what it means to say. Harizu lo tinase lo sham yomer nishem nosim matana. In reality, in this case, where Reuven says to Rachel, this is your get on the condition that you marry Shimon. So I say, so step one, she can't marry Shimon. Why can't she marry Shimon? Rabbinic prohibition, it looks like Reuven is gifting his wife to Shimon. That's number one. V'mises lo teisei. But if she does marry Shimon, she doesn't have to leave the marriage. She doesn't have to leave the marriage. The mishum gezira lo mafkinon. Why? Because of a rabbinic gezira, we're not going to make her leave the marriage. So we'll say, so ideally, we don't want her to marry Shimon because it doesn't look right. But if she did marry Shimon, we will not make her leave the marriage. Ha la'ach, as the Gemara says, good. Amalei Rava, so Rava said to Rav Nachman, lo hu de lo tinase. So it sounds like what you're saying is she shouldn't marry Shimon, ha la'achar tinase. But she can marry Levi. So the Gemara said, well, one second, but how can you do that? She has to fulfill the Tanai. What about the Tanai? Maybe you'll say there is a way to fulfill the Tanai. How do you do it? Let her marry him today, and he could divorce her tomorrow. He could divorce her on others. We'll say, watch what the Gemara is saying. She could marry Levi. Why could she marry Levi? Because she could always fulfill the Tanai at a later time. Right? Let her marry Levi today, so to speak. She'll get divorced, tomorrow, and marry Levi. In other words, what that means is, since at some point in time she can fulfill the Tanai, So maybe we're okay with letting her marry Levi, as long as at some point in her lifetime, she does go ahead and marry Shimon, fulfill the Tanai, and therefore the get is going to be good retroactively. To which the Gemara says, Ulahach the plugis alei Rabbi Yehuda kamedamisle. And you're comparing this to the person who argues in Rabbi Yehuda. Who argues Rabbi Yehuda? So I'll say, watch this. De'itmar, konam einai bishina hayom imashe lemachar. What's the interesting case? Person says, literally konam. Right, there was a Lasson of neder. Right, a person says, I hear sleep should be konam. Sleep should be usher to me today if I sleep tomorrow. So here the case, right? Sleep should be prohibited to me today if I end up sleeping tomorrow. So we'll say, what do you do in a case like this? Rabbi Yehuda, al yishan hayom shema yishan machar. Rabbi Yehuda says, don't sleep today. Don't sleep today, lest you come to sleep tomorrow. Rav Nachman says, not a problem. Sleep today. Sleep today, and we're not concerned you're going to sleep tomorrow. In other words, you can sleep today, and we're confident that you won't sleep tomorrow. So Rabbi says, so the Gemara is suggesting over here, maybe we're holding like Rav Nachman. Essentially what Rav Nachman says is, don't worry about today, right? Don't worry about it. I should say, really, don't worry about tomorrow, right? Tomorrow you'll do what you have to do. Today, do whatever you want to do. So same idea, it's quite a stretch, but same idea. The Gemara is saying, let her marry Levi today. What's the big deal? Tomorrow she'll marry Shimon. Right? At a certain point in time in the future, she'll go ahead and she'll marry Shimon. Don't worry about today. Tomorrow you'll take care of what you need to take care of. We'll say, by the way, it's such a fascinating life machlokes. Right? In other words, we'll say, if you know that you have something, right? So in this case over here, I'm making a neder that if I sleep tomorrow, sleep should be prohibited on me today. So the question is, I will say, how far do I have to worry about tomorrow? How far do I have to worry about tomorrow? So you have over here, so Rabbi Yehuda is saying, you absolutely have to worry about tomorrow today. So therefore, don't sleep today, lest you come to sleep tomorrow. Rav Nachman says, don't worry about it. Worry about today, worry about tomorrow. Right? If you spend today worrying about tomorrow, first of all, you can't go ahead and control tomorrow, and you end up losing out on today. Right? So ultimately, again, so we'll say, right, the famous Maimar Chazal, don't stop thinking about tomorrow, right? So apparently, not everyone agrees with that statement of Chazal, right? Rav Nachman will say, stop thinking about tomorrow. Stop thinking about tomorrow. Again, we'll say, it's such a, obviously the answer is finding somewhere in the middle, right? Because to be only present focused and not worried about the future is a shtickle irresponsible. To only be future focused at the expense of the present, ultimately, again, causes you to lose out on life. But there is something incredible that Rav Nachman is saying is, let today be today, right? And tomorrow will be tomorrow, right? Maximize today. Tomorrow, you'll figure out when tomorrow comes. I will say, it's also an interesting, so I think we recognize this as we get older as well. There's another reason why you can't really plan for tomorrow, because the truth is, you have absolutely no idea what tomorrow is going to look like. You know, so I was driving to shul this morning, and I'm sure I don't know if anyone lost power. Right. So there are a lot of people without power, and it's fascinating. You know, you think about it, that yesterday, right? People made plans for today, for Tuesday. They made plans, right? And I was saying, now what happened? That happens for many. Those plans are like, no, we're shelving that. We've got no power. Right? We've got no power. We have to suddenly again figure out what are we doing with the refrigerator? Right? What are we doing with this? What are we doing with that? So it's just fascinating. Just fascinating how sometimes again it's not just the pshat that you shouldn't worry about the future because it comes at the expense of the present, but it's something even more that often that future is going to. You think you can plan for tomorrow because you think you know what tomorrow is going to look like. But then stuff happens in life, and the tomorrow you planned for today is not even the tomorrow that materialized. So you spend all of that time planning for something that didn't even come to fruition at the expense of maximizing your present. That's Rav Nachman. So the Gemara says, here's the difference between the cases. Hachi ashta, hasam bidida, bididei kaima. But say in the sleep case, you control the circumstances. Di by mavriz nafshe bisilusa. Literally, you could prick yourself with thorns so you won't fall asleep. We'll say over here, does she have control? If she marries Levi, does she have control that Levi is going to divorce her and then she's going to go ahead and marry Shimon? Of course not. So we'll say finally, third iteration. Here we go. Harizulo tinase lo lo v'lo la'acher. We'll say in reality, when Reuven says to Rachel, this is your get on the condition that you marry Shimon, really, Rochel can't get remarried with that get. Why not? Lolo, she can't marry Shimon. Why? Lolo tinase Shimon nishosehem nostim matana. She can't marry Shimon. Why? Doesn't look right. Doesn't look right. Right? At the end of the day, it looks like, again, right, Reuven's gifting his wife to Shimon. Right? La'achar lo tinase debai kimu l'tanai. She also can't marry Levi. Why can't she marry Levi? There's a tanai. So she's stuck. However, v'emnises lo, but if she did end up marrying Shimon, lo teise, if she married Shimon, I will say, it's a valid marriage. It's a valid marriage. She doesn't have to leave it. La'achar, but if she marries Levi, teise, she does have to leave that marriage. Why? Because ultimately, I will say, because that's like a shtickle adultery. Not shtickle adultery. Right? Because why? Because the get had a condition and she has not fulfilled the condition. Tanya Kavasi the Rava, we write that supports Rava. So also when Reuven says to Rachel, this is your get on the condition that you marry Shimon. Hare zu lo tinase lo v'lo la'achar. She really shouldn't remarry at all based on this get. Then he says lo, but if she married Shimon, lo teise, she doesn't have to leave the marriage. La'achar teise, but if she marries someone else, she does have to leave the marriage. Incredible. And that is the halacha l'maisa on that sugya. Tanabanan. Some great cases. Reuven says, Rachel, this is your get on the condition that you ascend to the heavens. Ascend to the heavens. Okay? This is probably a bit more shayach, right? Or on the condition that you go to the Tahom, right? Go to the Tahom, right? The Tahom means the depths, right? So Lamais, again, he says, so this is your get. So as I will say, these are impossible to know him. So the Gemara says, right? On the condition that you swallow a reed that is 4 amos long. Impossible. Bring me a reed that is 100 amos tall. Impossible. Shetavri es hayam hagodol baraglayach, that you walk across the sea on your feet. Wrong religion, right? So we'll say, so Lamaisa, he gives her all of these conditions that are obviously, again, impossible to fulfill. So what's that lacha? Ain't no get. So we'll say, it's interesting. The Gemara says, it's not a get. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema Omer. So Tanakama holds, it's not a get. It's not a get, invalid get. Why is it an invalid get? Because it has an invalid t'nai attached to it. The invalid t'nai, right, is essentially invalidates the entire get. Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says, no, kazeh get. No, this is a good get. Why is it a good get? Klal Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema, kol t'nai she'ef shelo l'kaimo b'sofo v'isala mitchila. So, eino ela kimafliga b'dvarim v'chasher. Because what Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says essentially, when you attach an impossible tonight to a get, you know what we do with that tonight? You know what we do with it? We throw it out. We just look at it as some hyperbolic posturing, right? But it's really absolutely irrelevant. It's irrelevant. So I will say, the Lach Rabbi Yehuda over here is very important. First, Rabbi Yehuda says, right? He says, kazeh get. He says, this is a get, right? This type of situation is a get. And then he espouses a t'nai. A klal. Right? What's the klal? What's the general rule? Any t'nai that is impossible to fulfill, we look at just as hyperbolic posturing, and therefore, again, ultimately, it's really void. The t'nai itself is really irrelevant, and the document, in this case, the get, will remain kosher. Incredible, I will say. Amar Nachman, Amar Rav, halach Yehuda ben Tema. Rav Nachman is saying, Rav da halach avaz Yehuda ben Tema. That is the halach, I will say, that anytime you have an impossible t'nai attached to a get, we look at the t'nai as just nothing, and the get ultimately again will remain valid. Incredible. So the Gemara says, our Mishnah supports this as well. The Tani, Kol she'efshar lo l'kaimo b'sofo, v'hisna la b'tchila. So t'nai kayim. Any type of t'nai which you can fulfill, ultimately again the t'nai is valid. Ha'iyafshar, which you can infer from this, if you can't fulfill the t'nai, then t'no batal, then the t'nai is batal, shmamina. So both say, so the Gemara actually concludes that the halach allows Yehuda ben Tema. This is very important, a very important halach. We'll say any time husband makes a t'nai, and the t'nai is impossible to fulfill, we look at the t'nai, we'll say again, just to be clear, impossible, not difficult, right? Impossible to fulfill, right? Swallow a reed that's 4 amos long, impossible. Carry me a reed that is 100 amos long, impossible. Go to the heavens, go to the Tahom, walk on water, impossible. impossible. So halacha Master Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says, not a Tanai. Tanai is void. Get is valid. Incredible. Ibaylo. What about the following case? We'll say this is fascinating. Hareze gitech al menashe tochli basar chazer mahu. Wow. This is your get on the condition you eat chazer. You eat chazer. What's the halacha? Amar Abaye, he. Rabbi Yehuda says, this is it. He also means this is exactly the case of Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. This is an impossible tonight. A yid doesn't eat chazer, right? So for me, eating chazer is just as impossible as walking on water, right? So l'maisa, again, that's the case. That's the case. In halacha l'maisa, the tonight will be void, right? And ultimately the get is good. Rava Amar Rava says, afshar da achlav lakya. Rava says, no, she could eat chazer and get malchus. As well say, you could eat chazer, right? You could eat chazer and you get the punishment. So technically speaking, she can't fulfill tonight. So in other words, we'll say, Rava is making a distinction between the Tanai that is impossible versus the Tanai that is possible but has ramifications. In other words, we'll say, telling her this is your get on the condition you walk on water, that's impossible. That's impossible. Saying this is your Tanai on the condition you eat chazer, that's possible. That's possible. Again, it's usher. You'll get malchus for it, but it's possible. So the Gemara says, La Abaye, according to Abaye, when Rabbi Yehuda said klal la asui basar chazer. So according to Abaye, when Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema espoused his principle came to include a case like chazer. Because Abaye says, impossibility includes that which is prohibited as well. If something is prohibited to me, it falls into the realm of impossible. L'Rava kazel lemeute basar chazer. According to Rava says no. When Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema said kazeh get means if the Tanai is impossible, then ultimately the Tanai is void. If the Tanai is possible, then ultimately the Tanai is extended. The Tanai ultimately again is in existence. So Meisei Gemara is supposed to say fascinating machlokas. Meisei Gemara is a kasha harei zegitech amanasheti ba'ili leploni. What's the interesting case? Reuben says to Rachel, divorcing his wife, right? This is your get on the condition you have relations with Shimon. So what's the halacha? Niskaima Tanai harei zegat. If she fulfills the Tanai, the get is valid. Ve'im lav eino get, and if not, it's not a get. Almanas shaloti ba'ili la'abo la'avicha. What happens if he gives her a get and he says, this is your get on the condition that you don't have relations with my father or your father? So, okay, in Choshishin Shema Nivala Lahen. Ultimately, again, we're not Choshesh. So again, the get is valid, and we're not Choshesh that she engaged in any of these acts. V'ilu, yet what we infer from this is, V'ilu al minas shetibayli la'abo la'avicha lo katani. I will say, interestingly enough, what's not included over here? What's not included over here is what if he said to her, this is your get on the condition that you have relations with my father or your father. To which the Gemara says, La Abaye necha, l'Rav Akasha. According to Abaye, it makes sense why this is not included. Why? Because we'll say Abaye includes any case of Isser in the case of impossible. Rava does not. So according to Rava, technically speaking, could she have relations with her father or his father? She could. But in other words, it's physically possible. So we'll say, in the case of basar chazer, we'll say she controls that. In other words, she can eat it and she can get malchus. Right? Ploni nami after the mashachtale b'mone. So even if it's a tanai, this is your get on the condition to have relations with Shimon. We'll say, assuming that there's not anything illicit here, she could give Shimon money. She could bribe Shimon to engage in the act of relations with her. Ela abba va'avicha. Bedidak Kaima, but also in a case of where she says have relations, he says have relations with my father, your father, is that dependent on her? So he says also that's a pretty serious transgression, even if she's willing. Who's to say that her father or his father will be willing? In other words, it's not in her control. What Rav is suggesting over here, Bose, is even though Rav says that Isser is not impossible, it's only about the time when she controls the violation of the Isser. But if she doesn't control the violation of the Isser, then that falls into the realm of impossible. Shabbos say, the Rava, klal la'asui abba va'avicha. According to Rava, when Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema said klal, that comes to include the case of abba and avicha. Kazeh lemi'ute basar chazer. Kazeh comes to exclude the case of basar chazer, that would be a valid tonight. We'll say pay daled on the days. La'abaye, according to Abaye, klal la'asuye basar chazer. Abaye says klal comes to include the case of basar chazer, that it's not a proper tanai. Kazeh lemi'ute ploni, and Kazeh comes to exclude the case of ploni, where he says to her, this is your get on the condition that you have relations with ploni. Abai would agree that such a case could be a valid tanai. So I will say, what we are left with, we are now on the second line of 84b, pay daled on the days, and I will say what we are left with is something really interesting. So here's what everyone will agree with. Everyone will agree with Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema's klal, right? This klal is that if you attach an impossible tanai to a get, what's the status of the tanai? What's the status of the tanai? Void. It's hyperbolic posturing, it's nothing. It's ridiculousness, right? It just falls off. We just ignore it. We just ignore it as if it's not there. The interesting machlokes also between Abai and Rava is what happens if he attaches a tanai that would cause her to violate an isser. Right? This is your get on the condition you eat chazer. You eat chazer. So Abaye will say, Aser is the same thing as impossible. Rava says, Aser is not the same thing as impossible. Why? What's the definition of impossible? What's the definition of impossible? Impossible. Right? Isser is possible. It just comes with ramifications. So both sides said it's fascinating. Such a fundamental machlokes. Let's analyze it a bit more. I'm a base. 84b, second line. So Nesi Gemara Zekasha, Hareze Gitich Amanasha Tochli Basar Chazer. Right? This is your get on the condition that you eat chazer. Then Haisa Zara Amanasha Tochli with Truma, or for that matter, again, let's say she's a non-Kohen, right? A non-Kohenes. And he says, this is your get on the condition you eat Truma. Then Haisa Nazira Amanash Tishtiyayin, or for that matter, again, she's a Nazira. She's a Nazira, and he says, this is your get on the condition you drink wine. So we're saying all of these cases, what's the halacha? Nizkayim at-tanai, harei get. If you fulfill the tanai, the get is good. Ve'im lav, ain't no get. And if not, it's not a get. So we're saying, the Rava necha, la baye kasha. According to Rava, this is perfect. Right? This makes sense. Why? Because according to Rava, what does Rava say? Rava says, Aser is not impossible. Aser is not impossible. And therefore, in all of these cases, Rava say, Could the Nazir drink wine? Is she able to drink wine? Yes. Is the non-Kohenes, is the Israelis able to eat Truma? Yes. Right? Is she able to eat Chazer? Yes. So therefore, again, technically speaking, these Tanaim can be fulfilled. And therefore, again, non-compliance, it's not impossible. Therefore, the Tanai is a valid Tanai, and non-compliance causes the get to be void. La Abaye kasha. We'll say according to Abaye, this poses a contradiction because Abaye holds that Aser is the equivalent of impossible. Do you think this price reflects the view of everyone? So the Gemara says, Hamani Rabbanani. This is the view of the Rabbanan. So we'll say, this is such an incredible Musar. What Abaye will say is, Abaye says, I accept the fact that not everyone agrees with me. In other words, you're bringing a brisa. I understand the brisa. That's fine. I can explain to you. The brisa reflects the opposing view. That's it. So again, the brisa doesn't pose a problem to me, right? The brisa, I'll admit, there is another view out there. The brisa is part of the brisa. What an incredible Musar Haskell. Well, say, imagine if we actually operated this way in life and not just on the pages of Gemara, accepting the fact that there are opposing views, right? See, I will say, when you're comfortable in your own skin and you're comfortable with your own hashkafas and you're comfortable with your own outlooks and you're comfortable with your own ideas, you're also comfortable with the fact that other people believe differently. Hey, I will say the only time people feel threatened by opposing views is when they're not confident enough in their own. If you're confident in you, I'm okay with other people disagreeing. I'm okay with other people having different hashkafas, different outlooks, different isms, different this. Fine, go, whatever. I know for me what is the truth, and I know what is. So we'll say, what's happening? What's happening in this Gemara? Abaye is confident in his position. He's so confident that he's able to say, of course, there are other opinions. There's another brisa, and that brisa says not my opinion, but the good news is, I'm comfortable enough in me. I'm confident enough in me that I could also accept the fact that other views exist. Incredible. The Seif Voklei, the Mas Amash HaKasa Torah. Okay, so now the Gemara says, so let's take a step back. Let's focus on the Chazer case for a little bit, right? So Reuven says to Rachel, this is your get on the condition that you eat Chazer. So remember again, so Abaye says, Asr is equivalent to impossible. Rava says, no it isn't, because this Lamaise is possible. So that's our machlokas. So Gemara says, but I have a more fundamental question. Why isn't this a problem of masna amasha kasa batorah? Well, see, in general, when you make a t'nai, which runs contrary to Torah law, what's the halacha? Masna amasha kasa batorah t'nai batal. Well, so we have a general principle that says, whenever you make a t'nai, which runs contrary to Torah law, your t'nai is batal. Your t'nai is batal. So I don't understand. So Reuven says to Rachel, this is your get on the condition that you go ahead and you eat basar chazer, right? You eat chazer, that is a t'nai which runs contrary to Torah law. So why don't we just say automatically that is batal? So this is very interesting. When do we say that when you make a t'nai which runs contrary to Torah law, t'nai is batal? Keep going, sheira, ksusa, va'onasa. So I will say, the paradigmatic case of that is actually very interesting, is where it will say, Sher, Ksus, and Ona represent the three obligations that a husband has to his wife in marriage. Sher is clothing, Sher is mizonos, is sustenance, Ksus is clothing, Ona is physical intimacy. Let's say a man says to his wife, Hare'at nikudeshasli, almanas she'in lech alai, Sher, Ksus, and Ona. Man says to his wife, this is you, right? We're married on the condition that you have no claim, right? For share ksus and ona on me. So we'll say, what's the halach in such a situation like that? It's ena mikudeshas. Why? Because she's masna amash shakasav batorah. Right? So the Gemara says, when we say masna amash shakasav batorah, ultimately, the paradigmatic example of that is like in a case of kiddushin. In the case of kiddushin, where ultimately, again, he's trying to betroth her, but he's trying to betroth her without the fundamental tenets of marriage. Dehu ka'akar. We'll say, why is this the paradigm? Because we'll say, in this case, he's the one uprooting the biblical law, right? So he says to her, here's the case of kiddushin, and you are mikudeshes to me on the condition that you have no biblical claims against me that normally come with marriage. So such a t'nai is batal. Why is it batal? Because he's actively uprooting biblical law. Now we'll say, watch this. Tahu ka'akar. Aval hacha ihi ka'akra. Now we'll say, this is incredible. Over here, he's not uprooting Torah law. Now we'll say, who's going to end up uprooting Torah law? She does. Now we'll say, so this is actually fascinating. Let's take a step back over here. There's a concept, masna mashakasav batorah. Right, when you make a condition that runs contrary to Torah law, so what's the halacha? Your t'nai is batal. Now say, when is that true? The Gemara suggests, when is that true? That's true when the one who is making the t'nai is the one who's actively uprooting the law as well. So the t'nai maker is the one who through his t'nai himself or herself actively uproots biblical law. So a paradigmatic example of that, Reuven says to Rachel, you're married to me on the condition that you have no claims for sustenance, clothing, or intimacy. So that t'nai is batal. T'nai is batal because Reuven, you're actively uprooting biblical law. We will say that's different in this case. Right? Reuven says to Rachel, this is your get on the condition that you eat chazer. I will say, who's making the t'nai? Reuven. Who's uprooting the t'nai? I'm sorry, I should say, who's uprooting biblical law? Rachel. It's fascinating technicality. So in other words, everyone will subscribe to the concept that masna amasha kasa batorah t'nai batal. When you make a t'nai which runs contrary to Torah law or uproots Torah law, your t'nai is batal. But that's only true if the person who's making the t'nai is the one who's actively uprooting the law. In this case over here, fascinatingly enough, he's making the t'nai, but she's the one doing the avera, right? She's the one uprooting the law. That's not the concept. So the Gemara says, "Ki amrina masna mashakasav batorah t'nai batal." I'm sorry. Good. Ela Amar Avina, Ela Ravina says, "Ki amrina masna mashakasav batorah t'nai batal." When do we say that when you make a t'nai which runs contrary to Torah law, your t'nai is batal? Ki gon sherik susa va'onasa devadai ka'akra. We'll say furthermore, when do we say did I skip? Yeah. Okay. Maskifle Ravina, sorry. So Ravina raises a question. He says, 1 second. That's not fair. That's not fair. Why is she uprooting Torah law, right? Why is she any chazer? Why is she any chazer? Why? Because the t'nai that he made, right? She's not going to go ahead, right? Going to eat chazer on her own. The only reason she's eating chazer is because of the t'nai that he made. So the Gemara says, "Ishtachach tiu ka'akar." I think that's still called that he's uprooting biblical law. Ravina says, when do we say that that when you make a t'nai, which runs contrary to Torah law, that your t'nai is batal? When is that? She will say that's in a case where ultimately, again, the t'nai will definitely uproot Torah law. We'll say, take a quick look at Rashi. Last wide line on the top. Devadai ka'akar she'masar la kiddushin. Remember, in this case over here, he already gave her kesef kiddushin. V'harei hi ishto l'schayiv b'kulan. And then I will say, what happens? He gives her the kesef kiddushin. She accepts the kesef kiddushin. He says, this is your kiddushin on the condition, ultimately, again, that you have no claim of shir ksus and ona. So technically speaking, the only way for her to be married to him, ultimately, again, is through the negation of this biblical precept. So the Gemara says, however, Rabbi says she does have a choice in the get case. What's her choice? Don't get divorced. Others will say, it's not the pshat that she has to eat the chazer. She only has to eat the chazer if she wants a divorce. There's another option. What's the other option? Stay married. So we'll say that's the distinction also. When do we say Masta Mashakasa Batar Tino Batal? That's when, by definition, there's no choice but the negation of a Torah precept. So, for example, if he gave her the Kesef Kiddushin, she accepted the Kesef Kiddushin, and then he attaches the T'nai, ultimately the only way they're married is Halacha L'maisa if she goes ahead and then there's violation of a biblical precept. In this case over here, it says this is your get on the condition that you go out and you eat chazer. Okay, there's one, option one is eat chazer. Option two is don't eat chazer. Okay, I understand by not eating chazer they remain married, but that ultimately still remains a viable option. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, the t'nai, as much as it runs contrary to biblical law, does not automatically become void. A fascinating distinction. So the Gemara goes back to Ketzad Yasi Yidlana Hemeno. So I'll say, so remember again, in the case, so back to the Mishnah. So remember again, back to our original case, Reuven says to Rachel, this is your get on the condition, this is your get, and you are permitted to every man except for Shimon. So remember again, Rabbi Eliezer said that the get is a valid get. Ultimately, again, the Rabbanon say it's an invalid get. We already established how you pass like the Rabbanon. So there is a way to remedy this get. How do you remedy the get? So the Gemara says, what should you do? Take the get back, and give it to her again, this time without a t'nai. To which the Gemara says, Man Tana, who is the Tana? So Amar Chizkiya Rav Shimon Elazar, he decided Rav Shimon Elazar Omer, Ad sheyitlena himenu, v'yachzar v'yitnena la. Take the get back and re-give it to her. V'yomer la hagitech, right? And go ahead and say, this is your get. This is your get. Rabbi Yochanan says, Afilu tema Rebbe, it could even be Rebbe, Dilchon Amar, Shani Hacha, Hoil Knasali Pasaval Kuhuna. Could even be Rebbe, because your Tana ultimately said that case is different. The previous case we discussed is different. Why? Because ultimately, again, she acquired it at least enough to be invalidated for the Kuhuna. Again, I will say, so halacha l'maisa, what they're saying is, when you gave a get with this invalid Tana, that this is only your get, if you don't marry Shimon, chutz mi-Shimon, ultimately, again, it could be remedied by taking the get back, giving it again a second time. Kasvu b'socho. And I will say, up until now, we were talking about the fact that this Tanai was verbal. What happens if you actually wrote, right? Hari ak mutaros l'chol adam chutz mi-Shimon in the get? That's going to be much more problematic. Says the Gemara. Let's analyze. Amar Rav Safra, kasvu b'socho. Tanan Rav Safra said, ultimately, again, if the condition was written in the get, that would mamish invalidate the get. To which the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious, Kasa b'sochel tanan. It says that. That's what it said in Mishnah. To which the Gemara says, what would you have thought? Hanimi la'achar toref. I would have thought, ultimately, again, when is writing the condition in the get problematic? only if you inserted it after the Torah. Well, so remember again, a get, this goes back to, we had this in a little bit early on in the Masechta, a get has two parts to it, a Torah and the Tofes. The Torah, I should say, the Tofes is like the boilerplate. It's this thing that's the part that's the same in every single get. The Torah contains the couple specific information. So Gemara says like this, I'm out of thought. When you write the condition in the get, so writing it in the get is problematic, even if you write it in after the Torah. In other words, after the primary part of the get. Aval lifnei Torah, afilu al peh nami pasal. I will say, but let's say the condition is espoused before the Torah, I would have thought to say that maybe in that case, even if you just verbally say the condition, but it's being stated before the Torah was written, maybe that invalidates the entire get. Kamash Mala, no. Kamash Mala will say that Allah Lamaisa, the only time that the get itself becomes an invalidated instrument is when the condition itself of chutz mishimin is actually written in the get itself. Rava says, Lo shanu ela la'achar Torah. We've only learned after the Torah. Aval lifnei Torah afilu al peh nami pasal. Comes on. Rava says it's pretty dramatic. Rava says not true. When do we say ultimately again that the get is not invalidated? That's only ultimately again if the Tanai is stated or written after the Torah. Aval lifnei Torah, I would say if the Tanai itself is either written in the get before the Torah or even articulated before the Torah, that will invalidate the get. That's pretty incredible. Rava goes according to his reasoning. This. Rava said to the people who write the get, Shasku shetuke labal ad kasvinu le Torah Gita. Rava said this is incredible. Rava used to say, he would say to the sovereign writing the get, tell the husband to be quiet until the Torah is written. So Rava said, let me explain what's happening over here. So according to Rava like this. According to Rava, the Torah has to be written. It has to be written without any Tanai spoken out or any Tanai written in. And according to Rava, if the husband goes ahead and makes an invalid Tanai before or during the writing of the Torah, that will actually invalidate the get, even though, again, nothing is written in the get itself. All the more so, if something invalidating is written into the Torah itself, it will invalidate the get. Therefore, Rava said, it's incredible. Rava would say, halacha l'maisa, when writing the get, tell the sovereign, tell the husband to be quiet. The good news is, once the Torah, which contains the couple-specific information, is written, we're good. Then if the husband espouses any other tinaim, it's not going to invalidate the get in it. So we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up Amirat Hashem with this piece of Amirat Hashem tomorrow. Again, getting more into the specifics regarding the writing of the get. That's going to lead into the next mission as well. Shkoyach.